Okay, welcome everyone. We have, my name is Gina Grandy, for those of you who don't know me. And Meredith, just to confirm, you can see this screen, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you folks for joining us. My name is Gina Grandy, as I've said, and I am the editor of the Case Research Journal, and it is a pleasure to have you with us today. I am joined by my co-presenter, who I will let her introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Meredith Woodwark, and I'm assistant professor at Wilfrid Laurier University.
I'm going to ask everyone before we get started, if you can go to, on your computer, possibly, hopefully, or your phones, if you could go to www.menti.com to get started, or, and use the code above, because we have a couple of questions we've thrown in along the way. So I'll let you do that. Meredith, I don't know if you want to keep an eye on the chat in case we have anything coming up there that people are asking us questions.
I will.
So today, folks, and I'm going to say, we're going to hope that I hope that the technology works. And again, I'm going to, if something goes wrong, I'm going to take responsibility because it is usually the user, if that user is me. The focus of our conversation, our workshop, our discussion is let's bring more diversity into business cases, something really important to both Meredith and myself. I'm going to move forward, Meredith, and let's see what, hopefully we have everyone who's joining us. And we'll start with a question, and let's see how this works. So my question to you as we start this session, in writing or using cases featuring characters that represent a designated seeking group, who do those characters reflect? So do they reflect women, Indigenous people, visible minorities, people with disabilities, and or LGBTQ2+. So you should get an option now on Mentimeter where you can actually enter your results. I only have one person, so I'm hoping more people are logged. Oh, here we go. You can't see these results yet, but I can. I'm hiding the results. So we have 5 people. Meredith, do we have still about 20 people in our session?
I see 28 so far.
Great, fantastic. Oh, here we go. We're up to 8. I'm gonna show the results just in case everyone has oh no. So Meredith, you should be able to see those results right now, should you?
Yes.
Okay. So
like we got about 15 or 16 people have responded so far.
Great. Okay. Okay, so you can see here that when we look across, this is great actually in regards to diversity. The last time I did something like this, what we saw were almost all of them in women. So we have a nice split across the different equity-seeking groups in regards to either writing or using cases. And that really is a nice starting point for us as we start to think about what we want to talk about today and framing some of those strategies and questions. This is a bit of a side note, which I'll come back to, but as the editor of CRJ, I would be remiss not to remind you of upcoming submission deadlines. 3 of our special issues, so multidisciplinary cases, the end of October, short cases in January, and secondary source cases, the end of May. And I'm happy to talk about more of that in one of our socials later during the conference. When Meredith and I were talking about this session, initially we were going to put in a lot of context about, the need for having more diversity in cases, whether the ones we use or whether the ones we write. But we kind of came to the conclusion that if you were coming to this session, then you were already on board. And so we don't want to spend much time on that context, but we're happy to answer questions or discussions around that as we move forward. Business education has been, in the area of management education, there's been quite a lot of critique around management education being gender blind and diversity blind. So not even, looking at cases, I would say more broadly, and how there's great power as educators in management education because it is the place and space to learn and how to manage and to lead. There's certainly been some research that looks specifically at the power of case studies on influencing professional identities. And in a piece recently published by Sharon and McGowan, they talked about the hidden curriculum. And, in our classes, we become very familiar with a formal curriculum. So that, what we are writing in our course outlines, our learning outcomes, the pieces of assessment that we are using. But there's in our classrooms that really tie to this hidden curriculum, or what might also be referred to as informal curriculum, where the hidden curriculum contains implicit assumptions and stereotypes about men and women's management abilities. And if we broaden that to, let's say a diversity consideration, that hidden curriculum reinforces the belief that the education system is unbiased and neutral, but yet at the same time, it simultaneously reinforces and perpetuates existing beliefs, values, ideologies, and behaviors. And that's a quote from Sharon and McGowan in 2019. And, the question really at the heart of what Meredith and I are interested in is that we would argue in many education, and that translates into cases, are blind to gender and diversity, and failing to recognize. And that notion of, if we don't see it, then how could we ever become it? Just very quickly, a couple of highlights to really reinforce the lack of diversity in case studies. And there are a number of other studies I could look at. I did a quick review of the 17 best-selling cases in Case Research Journal in 2018 and 2019. Of those 17, only 3 had a protagonist of a designated equity-seeking group. 2 featuring a woman, 1 featuring a visible minority, and 2 others with a co-protagonist of sorts, one of whom was a woman, and 1 with a co-owner who was a visible minority. And 1 other case had a possible visible minority protagonist. When we look to Ivy Publishing, and I wanted to increase the volume, so looking at 96 best-selling cases in Ivy Publishing, and they looked specifically only at women protagonists. But of those 96, only 6 between 2013 and 2014 had featured a woman protagonist. 200 of the 266 cases published by Ivy Publishing in that period of time, 51 featured a woman protagonist. And there were certainly other, what we might call, alarming trends that emerged in regards to gender stereotypes around how women were being portrayed in those cases. For us, this matters, and it really, again, Meredith and I are tending not to dwell on the fact that there is an absence. We almost are starting from a place where we are assuming everyone here is on board in the sense that there is an absence and we need to do more about this. I want to highlight here some of the opportunities. So in 2016, the Case Research Journal published an issue on women's leadership with all women key case protagonists. We have 1 coming out by the end of this year on women entrepreneurs, but there are a number of others. So Harvard Business Publishing, female protagonists. The Case Journal with a special issue on underrepresented perspectives, Black leaders in business. The Case Writing, Emerald has a case writing competition on women protagonists. And just recently, when we look up here in the corner of the screen, Harvard Business Publishing has put together a collection of cases which feature protagonists of color. Now, the positive thing about this is that it is getting attention. And I think that actually within case studies, as case writers and case adopters, we have a real opportunity to make a change in our classroom and to have that change then reflect what's happening in business practice. We're going to focus most of our time around really the way forward and identifying strategies. A couple of years ago, Cynthia Ingalls and I wrote an article for that special issue on women leadership at CRJ. And we talked about two possible strategies forward. One, the silent revolution, whereby as case doctors, we may not want to draw attention. We may not feel equipped to be able to talk about racial considerations, intersectionality, or even about gender implications. But, simply just adopt cases where there are women protagonists, where there are protagonists that represent one of the other designated equity-seeking groups. We also talked about a strategy of calling out the elephant in the room, a far more perhaps explicit way to say, no, this is not good enough, and having discussions, getting students to have conversations around the key protagonists, around some of the underlying assumptions. And as we move to working towards some of those strategies, one of the questions that we want to get you to think about is, do you have any hesitancy or reluctance in writing or using cases with protagonists who represent a designated equity-seeking group? And what might they be? And this will help us then move into more of the workshop discussion. So on Mentimeter, folks, you'll get several options that you can enter. We see a number of interesting, I don't know, Meredith, if you want to jump in here as well. I don't know if there's any conversation happening in the chat. We see a number of, I think, common themes surfacing here. The notion of, whether or not we may have the skills or knowledge to be able to have that type of conversation. The notion of perhaps, giving voice or taking voice possibly for others, so speaking for others. When actually, as someone has said here, I'm a white man, and others have talked about, if I've often said if I'm non-Indigenous, really I don't feel comfortable speaking for or giving, being the voice of those experiences. Others here have talked about being able to get access, and others talked about sort of, potentially. I'm assuming that from that, less appeal for possibly students, I assume. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Meredith,
we're good in the chat. Mostly the chat, I think, reflects people's learning curve on following the technology, learning the technology. So topic-wise in the chat, but I think that your point here, your question, really reflects the fact that as case writers, we have our own perspective, and when our purpose is to share the perspective of others, we really need other people's involvement. And if that has not traditionally been how we have written cases, or just the process that we use, it means you have to do things differently than we have in the past, right? And that's a lot of the struggle. If we want to have broader representation in our cases, we're going to have to learn how to do some of this, something that maybe we've had a comfortable way of doing in the past. We're going to have to learn how to do it differently in order to overcome some of these barriers that have came up on your screen there.
Great. And I deliberately closed the screen for the second so that I could come up, because what I wanted to do is, before we kind of move into that section of strategies for change, to see if there were any kind of comments or discussion points in the group. And, Meredith is able to share video if anyone did have sort of any comments or questions before we kind of dig into talking about strategies for change. Okay, so what I'll do then, Meredith, if you're open, I will pull up the screen again, and we'll move into, maybe it'll be a disaster, Meredith, what we're going to try to plan to do now, but we're going to give it a go.
All right, so Gina is going to bring up our slides here. So the second half of our presentation is really about the idea of, so what? What are we going to do about this? And what can various people involved in the process of case writing and case publishing do about this? And so we're assuming that we're preaching to the choir about the idea that the case literature does need diversification. And what we'd like to spend the rest of the time on today is getting people's ideas and brains working around what are we going to do about it, and what in our various roles are we able to do that? So Gina, are you able to advance the slide? There we go. Good. I'll leave that with you. Okay, so what we've done is, and this is, we're working on the fly, designed for Zoom, but working with HopIn, so we're going to see how this goes. But our plan is to look at various people in the case writing the case writing process, and get people to work in groups devoted to each one of those topics. So we've identified a list of 7, and maybe there are people who are missing or groups that are missing in this process. If there are, let us know. But we've identified a group of 7 different players along the process, and we'd like people to focus in the next exercise around what kind of strategies, what kind of implementable actions or ideas can we come up with for those particular groups to help us move the dial on diversifying cases. So our list of 7 are, so case publishers and editors we put together in one. So that's our first group. Our second group is case writers, obviously. So people like us, what can we do? The next group is case instructors, so people who are adopting cases and using cases in the classroom. And then I threw this one in there to see if anybody's got any ideas. What about administrators of business schools or schools? Do they have a role to play, and what could that be? Students, what can students do? Because they're users of it as much as we are. So what can students do if they want to see more diversification in cases as well? What about potential case protagonists? So people who could be telling their stories in the case format. What could they do? And then the last one is reviewers, of course. What could reviewers do to help encourage diversification of cases on a variety of different levels? If we've missed anybody who you think we should, as a group, that we should be talking about, let us know. And what we're, Gina and I are looking at this as a way of starting the discussion, but also to get some ideas from you guys and get you thinking about ideas. So what we're going to do is, and hopefully this will work, but if not, our backup plan is come back here. That's our backup plan. Okay?
And Meredith, can I add as well? I mean, essentially what we're going to ask you to do is to role play, right? So, you know, and we want, so it's not about if you are a case publisher, go to that particular breakout room. It would be more about what we'd like to see is actually that people take on the role essentially, or take the lens from these different categories of groups and kind of what is it we think we can be doing to create change as it relates to increasing diversity in the cases that we around the key protagonists. Meredith, have you checked to see if in the session that we have named them, or do we have to kind of tell them one goes here or that type of thing?
I don't know if maybe Michael can answer that.
Yeah, jump in there, guys. Yeah, they are named. So I'm looking at them on my other screen there. So that's called Diversity Breakout Room Students, Diversity Breakout Room Administrators. So Fantastic. It's named Diversity Breakout Room, and it has the descriptor from one of your 8 categories.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So what we'd like you to do is, because the way the HopIn is set up is it's by session, we have set up separate sessions for you to go to one of those 7 or 8 different areas related to whatever one resonates with you. Which one do you want to think about for the next 10 minutes? Which role, which perspective are you most interested in? So we have about 28 people in here. So ideally we have about 3 people or so in each one, but it's fine. You can go wherever you wish, and we'll fill in the gaps as needed. So what we'd like you to do is spend about 10 minutes with whoever's in there with you, brainstorming around what can this particular group of people do in terms of strategies to help address this problem. And then in your group, come back with one, maybe two sort of top strategies that you agreed in your team are ones that you really want to discuss and champion. So we'll give you 10 minutes.
And when you come back, and Meredith and I will pop into your sessions as well, but when you come back, what we will do is I'd ask perhaps that we have a spokesperson possibly from the different groups, and we'll share your video if you're able. If not, we can use the chat, but we'll give you some opportunity as well to highlight some of those one or two key strategies. And Meredith and I have a number of others to share with you as well.
Yeah. And we're always grateful if anyone wants to keep a list and send them to us. We're collecting ideas for the future. So I have, so 3:40. So let's say 10 minutes, we'll start back here, meet back here at 3:50. Does that sound good?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. And remember, the plan is come back here if it doesn't work at the other end.
And Michael has just kind of raised a note to tell us the time. So here's, I think, perhaps the easier way to say, look at your clocks right now, and you have 10 minutes before you come back, regardless of where you are. But Meredith and I will pop into the sessions and draw you back if you're not back here in 10 minutes.
Right. So you need to leave this session and go to the sessions button, find one of the ones that matches with where you want to be, and come back here to this session in 10 minutes. Have fun.
Sounds good. We're only down to 11 people, so people are going somewhere, Meredith.
Awesome. I'm going to try going into one too.
I'll see you in a few minutes, Meredith. Thank you, Michael.
Okay, so it looks like we've got about 8 of us back. I know 10 minutes was pretty quick to go through that exercise, but I think the value will be in debriefing it together here. Welcome back, Gina.
Thank you, Meredith. It was a bit clunky, Meredith, but hopefully I did pop into one to pull people back, so hopefully the others are coming back as well.
Oh, okay, that's a good idea.
And I'm going to, I'm just going to see, rather than the Mentimeter, I'm going to pull up a PDF to see if that might help a bit better with kind of the sharing of the slides.
Okay, great. So we'll give it a minute or two for everybody to come back. That might have been ambitious to do that exercise. Oh yeah, some people said we lost track of time a bit. Yes, okay. All right, I have no way of knowing how many people are still in other sessions over there. So I think maybe what we'll do is, for those of you who are back, what we'd like to do is hear from you. We'd like to hear what was the topic that you were focused on, and what was your 1 or 2 strategies that you would like to share with the group about what that group of people could do to help with addressing greater diversity in cases. So I'm not sure how people put up their hand or apply to, oh, here we go. Thank you. Hello.
Hi, Meredith. My name is Audra.
Hi, nice to meet you.
And I thought since, you're asking for hands, so I thought I should be the first one to volunteer.
Thank you. I love it.
So I was in the room where we were, deliberating as case writers.
Okay. Great.
Okay. And we were 3 of us. And I'm hoping the others can also share their audio and video at this point of time so that all of 3 of us can share together. Thank you, Gina, for pointing out the 2 main directions initially, which said The one was about how to bring in more women as protagonists, and the second was to address the elephant in the room. My research has been about gender and generations. And initially, I wrote a case about a very strong protagonist, and she had started a not-for-profit organization, a very backward area of India. And then she also tried to set up a for-profit organization trying to balance both. But I was told way back then that it's difficult to publish cases for not-for-profit organizations, and I kind of backed out. So my dilemma as I presented to the group was that how do I write cases about diversity where I do not exactly find a protagonist? And but I have a context. For example, in India, there's a huge issue about maternity leave because it has been extended from 3 months to 6 months. And many organizations talk about the fact that when you come back after 6 months, we have to give the role to somebody else, and the original person is not respected or is not inducted back with the same enthusiasm as the previous role had. And so if this is the issue, and there are many other such issues, for example, some organizations have gone ahead and had paternity leave, but nobody is availing of paternity leave, because that's not the culture. So now if I have these contexts, how do I turn them around into cases? So one of the things that the group tells me is that now when you take up such discussions in the classes and you have other people who relate to it and you have some stories to start with, so maybe you could start with those stories and extend that as a case. For example, if it may not be somebody from an organization or somebody who was actually going through the organization side of it, but somebody who has faced it, like we saw in some other cases.
Okay.
So that's one perspective which came out. And the second perspective which came out was that, if you have a strong case, you could go and knock on the doors of organization asking whether they would relate to it and they're willing to, give you a story.
Right. So if I'm hearing you correctly, I think what you're saying is that as case writers, we can do our best to leverage the stories that we hear either with students or connections of various other, and use those stories when we hear them and approach people that we know who've experienced those about the possibility of having a case written about that. And then we can also, if we have a particular topic or story that we want to tell, we can try to find an organization in which to tell it, right? We can approach organizations and tell it that way. Is that a fair summary?
Yes, that is.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was really great. Thank you to the case writer group for sharing those with us. We've got some ideas coming through in the chat as well. So that was the case writer group. Did anybody work on case instructors? Was anybody in the case instructor group and want to speak about their strategies? I'll give it a second, see if anybody puts their hands up.
I don't think anybody was in that particular room, okay. Meredith, but I could be wrong.
Okay.
I see in the chat we have those who were case publishers, and we also have a student perspective, and I know we had as well in the reviewer. So might it make sense that we go to those, and then we can also share some of the other ideas as well?
Okay, so let's hear from the reviewers, students, or publishers and editors. Anyone from one of those groups. It's first come, first serve here. So, Mike, is there a way to tell people how to put their hand up? Here,
here we go. I'll give someone, I think Chuck is coming in.
Okay, and Danielle, I see you're up at bat. Thank you, Chuck.
You bet. Yeah.
You're in the student group, right?
Yeah, I was a student group and had some conversations in there. And this comes from my experience where I was challenged by a student in an MBA class to provide more diverse perspectives. And I thought that was, I congratulated her and said, spot on. And I made it safe for them to do that. And she was absolutely right. And so that's been my chore, and my job is to find more diverse perspectives and cases. but I was also asking them as alums, or even if they're part-time students, if they're working in organizations, what introductions can they provide to myself or others who are case writers to diverse protagonists who are in their organizations, and might they have a story to tell? So they would challenge me and I would challenge them to provide those introductions. So that was kind of a couple of strategies we talked about.
Great, great. I love that it's a great example of students realizing that they do have some influence. They're not just passive recipients of their materials, and that we can be very willing to adapt. So
Correct.
Good for you and good for them for doing that. And yes, absolutely, students can be some of the best connections for new ideas for cases, and they can be really helpful in getting access to interesting organizations that you might not otherwise be able to get access to. So fantastic. Thank you so much, Jack.
You bet.
Appreciate it. Let's see, Danielle was, there we go. And Danielle, I believe, was in the reviewers session, right?
Yes, that's correct. Thank you. Gina and I had an opportunity to chat, and it started out as me thinking as a reviewer, what could I do? And I had originally popped up saying I could be more curious. So having the opportunity to read a case and learn about a protagonist, I could dig and ask questions a little bit more. I appreciate knowing about John. Is there more to know about his family, his culture, his education that could bring out a second meaning of the case that students might find important? And my initial reaction was to not be direct and kind of have this list of diversity questions, but just to see what naturally comes out. And Gina took it a step further, and she said, we could consider asking, right? Is there anything here, as it relates to diversity, where we want the world to know, where this case would just shine brighter because students would see themselves, or because there would be an unexpected or just something that could move the story along, not necessarily change the direction of the case, but just enough of a background. So Gina and everyone, I look forward to continued conversations. I don't know that we know the way forward, but now we have options, which is something I had never considered before. So this is extraordinary.
Danielle, can I ask you to share the story you did with me about your case, where you had a protagonist who had a disability, and sort of how you had just kind of put it in subtly. It wasn't that it was the whole focus of the case. It wasn't the focus necessarily of the instructor's manual, but there's this little hint in there that actually added to the richness of the case situation and also the protagonist.
Thank you for asking. Yes, it was important for me to get that in, and I'm glad the reviewers felt the same way. So Paul Tuccieri, the son of Italian immigrants, and unique in many ways for his grit, no college experience, yet a successful business owner, which I was very proud to put in the case, made sure that the students knew that he didn't have a college background, because that's a fun, not what you'd expect. But something else very unique about Paul is that he's dyslexic. And that was not the focus of the case. It was this successful entrepreneur who made some blunders and bloopers and had to make some big decisions. But it was just to mention that Paul felt his dyslexia made him work 10 times harder than others, and that's what's led to his success. So it really was just one sentence, if I remember correctly, maybe two, but that was it. But to Gina's point, just knowing that, you can really appreciate the succession planning and the challenges that come Paul's way, and hopefully it gives a lot of the students power in seeing that a disability isn't going to prevent us from being successful.
What a great story. Thank you, Danielle.
Thank you.
Danielle, one of the things that Danielle and I talked about as well is, I talked about, this notion if you're a hammer, everything's a nail. And so for me, gender has been my primary lens. And so, I am far more in tune with that, but through doing and preparing, for this and us talking more about needing to represent diversity better in CRJ cases, it's also changed, I think, my lens to a certain extent around as an editor, what I can do in that around the reviewers and the case writers, but asking, that question, I think, and I would feel comfortable saying that, we have an agenda, or we're interested in actually advocating and making sure that our cases represent equity seeking groups. Might you tell us, is there anything about this particular protagonist that you can add? And I think that's something I can do as an editor to ask case writers as well, which relates to kind of the reviewing side. Now, Meredith, I see as well Olga, thank you so much, Danielle.
Thank you, Danielle.
Olga, can you join us by video, or would you prefer just to read from the chat? Olga's come from the group about case publishers.
Right.
So I don't know if Olga or someone from her group wants to join and give us that summary.
That was a big group. I'm not sure if everyone knows how to. I think what you do is you request to share video and audio, which should be at the top right-hand corner of your screen. I believe, if you want to jump in, but I will say that Olga very nicely put some points in the chat here too. So we might be able to do it that way if we're not going to get her on the screen. So that was a big group. I believe there were a lot of people in that group, and they came up with 3 actionable ideas. So one, this is for case publishers and editors. So one, give awards, and I'm not sure if that's specifically for diversity cases in particular categories. I assume so. Number 2 was continue with special issues and special themes, but also involve students. That's interesting. So perhaps with an inclusion of student written cases. I'm not sure if that's where you're going with that. And then focus not just on special issues, but changing policy for regular issues to invite more diversity as well. So rather than sort of, for lack of a better term, ghettoize the diverse cases in a special issue, strive for diversity all year round, I think is what that comment means there. So if there are any other groups there, feel free to jump in. I think we've covered the big ones.
Me to share the slides in case you want to go kind of as part of our conclusion, and keeping in mind the time to pull those up. I'll try my very best.
Thank you, Gina. Thank you. So we had a couple of backup slides here just in case we couldn't get in and out of breakout rooms, but you guys managed that very well. I'm very impressed by your flexibility and your ability to learn quickly in these things. So we had a couple of points too. So I'll just try to highlight some of the ones that we haven't discussed yet. So case publishers and editors, I think we've heard from about a lot of those ones. 2 I will mention that we included were making sure that diverse cases get some support, so they get some exposure, right? They get some marketing or profile, they get some sort of highlighting on websites and whatnot as well. And then I'll also point out the fact, and Gina mentioned this earlier, that there are some great special collections around. So Haas Business School has a great special collection called Egal, focusing on diverse cases. So there's lots of things that case publishers and editors can do, and Gina just mentioned her idea about asking case writers about the diversity components when they're having their cases reviewed, which is a great idea. So case writers, we had a couple of points. So approaching new kind of organizations that we don't normally do. So that goes to the idea we can cold call organizations that we see are really interesting, or we can try to get soft entries through our students or through our colleagues who may have some connections. I think that as case writers, one of the things we have to consider doing a lot more of to get better diversity is teaming up with or making references, referrals sort of to other case writers when we come across cool things that may or may not necessarily be in our bailiwick, but we think would be a great case or a great opportunity, provided you had the right team and the right people doing it. So being referral systems for one another, I think, is a great idea to try to get more diversity in cases. And then to Gina's discussion yesterday at the opening plenary session, focusing on that protagonist and case author relationship, and really developing that relationship so that you have the trust for people to be able to really trust them, trust you with their aspects of their identity that you may want to reflect in that case. Case instructors, we had a couple of notes. So one would be just to revamp, stop using the same old cases that you're always using. Maybe set yourself a goal of, this is one thing I do, is I always set myself a goal of at least 1 or 2 new cases, like brand new, fresh, hot off the press, new cases that I'm going to use every time I teach a course, so that it's not the same old, same old. And then we may also want to consider applying a diversity lens to some of the cases that we've been teaching for a long time that weren't necessarily written for that purpose, or the instructor manual may not be written for that purpose. But I'm thinking Gina has a paper about applying a gender lens to cases and consideration of that, and I think we can do that in other cases that we have. We could apply various different diversity components. How would we view this case, or would it affect our decision if the protagonist had a different identity than what we saw? So we can do that in a lot of our other cases. Okay, so that was what we had for those groups. And then the other groups, we didn't have people dig into administrators, which I'm not surprised at, but that's fine. We did have people dig into students, and I think students can be hugely important here. I'm really glad to hear that students are pushing back and asking for greater diversity, but they can help us with that. They can help us in accessing, and they can help us with ideas. That's great. Case protagonists, sometimes there are people out there who they want to tell their story, but they don't know how to get the story told. So one thing I think would be really interesting is if we can figure out a way to sort of help people get a case about their organization or their situation kickstarted by somebody. How do you do sort of a dating service between people who are interested in having a case about their company or their situation and somebody who's going to write it for them? How do we set those things up? So I think that would be a great problem if somebody wants to put their head to that one. And then reviewers, we talked a bit about reviewers, what reviewers can do. Danielle spoke about the idea of being curious and asking more questions, which I think is fantastic. And then just asking some questions that may not have necessarily been questions we always ask in the review process, but can we ask some questions that might help bring out another layer and another set of complexity in the case that might be great. And I think one thing to think about is that not all cases have to be explicitly about diversity, but like Danielle's example, it's nice to have real fleshed out people in their fullness represented, and it doesn't have to be the focus of an IM or a case, but it's nice to see that kind of the kind of fullness of case characters, so students can see themselves represented and see some of these great stories that are out there. Okay.
Meredith, one of the things I see Maria has also noted here is, when you were talking about refresh your cases, she talks about also that she keeps feedback from students or collects feedback from students on the cases she used, keep them, improve, and then start using. And that, that may also be a forum for empowering students in the class who may not be as brave perhaps as the student in Chuck's class, who basically said, no, we expect to see more diversity in the classes. But that notion of actually, the students may feel far more comfortable. I didn't see myself in this case, like in any of the cases. My research is on gender, and I remember how when I first started teaching our EMBAs, I didn't look across who was teaching the classes, but these students were at the end of their program. And in my course evaluations, there were 4 or 5 students who had said, this is the first woman who's taught us in our entire EMBA program. Now, it just happened to be an anomaly year. Typically, there were more. But for me, that triggered this notion, and it was always on my mind, but I was really unaware, and I shared it with the associate dean at the time who, moving forward, we just made sure that there were more women. And so it came out in this kind of unexpected way. And I think the same thing could happen with our cases. As Maria has said, it will give voice to some of our students.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Okay. Well, thank you. I have just in the chat, I have just put my email address in there because Gina and I are looking for any and all ideas that you may have in how we can help people address this issue, how we can develop a more diverse case literature. So if you have any, please feel free to share. If you have any great ideas, just send me a note. I'm happy to hear them, and we will compile them and try to get those ideas out there so that other people can start using them as well. But thank you very much for your time today and your attention today and your willingness to to work with us as we figured this out. You guys did a great job, so thank you very much for that.
Thank you, everyone. I just want to echo for bearing with us through the little bit of clunkiness. We were probably overly ambitious in using 3 HopIn. I'm using other sessions and using Mentimeter, but somehow we managed to get through it, and we have some great suggestions. Meredith and I are planning to write an article that we'll put in CRJ, so please do send your questions as well as your ideas, because those questions will also help Meredith and I write that article so that it actually does have value for all kinds of case writers out there. So thanks so much, everyone, and we'll see you in the break. Thank you, Meredith.
Thank you. Thanks, Gina. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Michael.